Thank you once again for joining us this morning. My name is Lisa. I am the Head of Business Development at Clean Slate Training and Employment, which is home to Quids In. For those of you who don't know us, we are a not-for-profit community interest company supporting people on low incomes across the UK with money guidance, employment support and digital skills. And we do this through one-to-one support, through group workshops, and through Quids In magazine, guides, digital information and toolkits. For those that have just joined, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what organisation you're from. For those that have already done that, thank you very much. So this webinar is brought to you by the Quids In Professional Network, which is dedicated to ending hardship and poverty across the UK by uniting professionals who share this same mission. And is primarily made up of practitioners working within social housing, local authorities, financial capability, digital inclusion, welfare support, and more. The majority of you attending today are already part of this network, but if you're not, you will have the opportunity to sign up. A link will be added in the chat and in the follow-up information. Please can everyone put their mics on mute? It looks like everyone has done that, so thank you. There will be the opportunity for questions and for comments at the end through a panel Q&A. So please do add any questions or comments in the chat as we go along, and we will come back to them at the end. Or at the end, I'll invite you to take yourself off mute and you can then ask or comment in person when we get to that point. But if you think of something as we go along, please add it into the chat and we will come back to it. Okay. Near to the end of the event, a link to a feedback form will be posted in the chat function. If you could please fill this in, just that we can better understand what worked well and what you'd like to see from events in the future. That would be really helpful. Thank you. So let us begin as we explore how we can change the conversation and reconnect with communities who feel left behind. Our first speaker is Tom, who is the co-founder of Nice and Serious, a purpose-driven creative agency. So over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. And lovely to meet you all. Hopefully for a lot of you, it's sunny like it is here as well, just outside of London. So let me just bring up my screen and share. And I'm hoping that works. It does appear to work. Wonderful. So I'm going to talk to you quite briefly this morning about something that's been really on my mind recently. And it was a conversation, thanks Gemma for confirming you can see it. It was a conversation that came up recently when I had my head in my hands. I was speaking to a charity that we were working for just about the plight of the world and everything that's going on. And she said to me, she turned around and said, you know what, we just got to keep the fire alive, which I think was just a really powerful metaphor for what we all need to do right now. And so this little talk I put together was very much based on that idea about the importance of keeping the fire alive. So let me expand on it a little bit. So once you said that comment, I sort of went back and thought to myself, okay, what does it mean keeping the fire alive? And I was thinking, well, when we talk about fires in kind of metaphorical sense of what it means and storytelling, there's kind of I suppose, simple components to it, really. It starts ultimately with getting some logs. Obviously, you set those, let me see if I can make the skip. You set those logs afire. That creates warmth. And of course, when there's warmth around the campfire, it starts to spread. People come round, you put more logs on, it creates warmth and the audience grows. And again, I just felt that this was such a fitting metaphor for the importance of the stories that we need to tell. So just as a little bit of a back step, I've been working in communications in the storytelling business for almost 20 years now. And when I set up a small creative agency called Nice and Serious, with a mission to make creative work the world needs, and which basically means for the last 20 years I've been helping organizations to tell stories about things that really matter, essentially. But actually the journey started quite a bit before that. When I was 21, I'd just done a degree in environmental science, and my head was full of the theory of climate change, and I decided with a few friends to go on a cycle ride across the entire country from Land's End to John O'Groats, and with a trailer full of low energy light bulbs, starting conversations with strangers about climate change. And 1,000 miles later, and a lot of sazzle soreness, I came to the conclusion that nobody cared, or I think maybe more accurately or fairly, they had other more important pressing things to care about, making ends meet, for example. But I think that realization that people didn't care didn't really discourage me. It just made my mission a little bit clearer, that we needed to learn how to tell better stories to get people to care about some of the biggest, most pressing issues that we're facing, not just across the environment, but also society and equality too. We needed to tell better stories. And I think what really frustrated me at the time was that, why is it that if you were Nike and you were selling trainers, you could tell an emotional story about a bit of leather and a rubber sole, and yet when we were trying to talk about the plight of planet Earth or about the state of inequality and how it was growing, we couldn't put together a really compelling story? And that's really what I just set up Nice and Serious to do, to try and tell stories that really make people care about important things. And I think looking back, and this is going back to maybe what I might consider the heyday of the progressive movement that I imagine most of us were all part of, it just felt like our campfire was burning really bright. It felt like every story we told, whether it was about sustainability, whether it was about equality or justice, it seemed to catch, and it seemed like the media was fanning the flames, and it just felt like we were all united by that feeling that progress was inevitable. But I think looking back now, I would perhaps argue, with the benefit of hindsight, that we almost got a bit giddy about being on the right side of history. And I think I at least made the fatal assumption that everyone was broadly with us. And as a result, I think with that overconfidence, the storytelling kind of almost became a little bit heavy. I think we started to become quite scientific. Language we used, we started to become a bit sanctimonious, if I was being a bit critical, tying ourselves in linguistic knots. A lot of what we said, we would sort of caveat with, it doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. And often we would take aim at those who didn't conform, peers that were trying to good things because they didn't quite get the language right or it didn't appeal to it. And I think arguably we obsessed over perfection rather than just progress and moving things forward. And you could look at it, building on this metaphor of the fire. I think we started throwing like wet logs, if you like, on the fire. We started talking about net zero, we started talking about climate justice, we started talking about systemic equality. And don't get me wrong, these are fundamentally critical ideas that we need to push forward as society, but as stories, they're just wet logs. They just fail to catch. And I think while we watched our fire, this progressive movement, slowly fade, I think what we failed to realize was the populist bonfire that was blazing behind us. And this was a fire fueled by fear, by nostalgia, by simplistic arguments to really complex problems. And I think we just, I didn't say we, I'm talking about me, but a lot of people that I know, we sort of just looked on, just stupefied by like what was going on. And I feel like our reactions were twofold. So for a start, I think our stories became quite reactive to the populist movement, to every flame. I think just totally aghast at the blatant lies, the undertones of national, not even undertones, just blatant nationalism, like the oversimplification of these incredibly complex problems. And by doing so, we were just fanning the flames. We were adding more logs to their story and making the problem worse. We were being drawn into their narrative. But on the other side of it, and I don't know if this kind of resonates with any of your experience, a lot of other organizations just fell silent. whether that was progressive businesses or charities. I think whether it was just scared of friendly fire or getting burned, like a lot of people have just been quite quiet over the last few months just for fear of stoking the far right or getting dragged into some kind of spat on X or something like that. And as a result, the flames have sort of gone out a bit. So, you know, and this is what I mentioned at the start of that comment, a kind of colleague mentioned, that the fire felt cold. It feels like our flames have gone out and the audience has sort of slowly drifted away. But I think, and I hope a lot of you would agree on the call today, that silence won't save us. You know, we can't just keep being quiet about what's going on and just watch the world move forward in a direction that we're not happy with. And ultimately, if we don't tell those stories, others will. And I think most of us, just looking on at what's happening in the world at the moment, will agree most of those stories don't end well. They're in the interest of a very small handful of very privileged people. So I think really what I'm getting at today is I think maybe it's time that we need to start a new fire, just to really consciously create a new campfire, one that's built ultimately on better fuel, on better stories that connect with what actually motivates people, whether that is ideas of hope grounded in reality, stories about pride, about community, about belonging, stories that actually relate to the experiences of our audience, the lived experiences, stories that our audience can identify with, stories that might actually have a chance of leading us to act. Because I think one thing that I've become really conscious of over the last couple of years is that actually communications, storytelling isn't static. It's not about finding and crafting that perfect log, plonking it on the fire, and then job done, like wiping our hands and walking away, because ultimately every story has a shelf life. It's about constantly tending to that fire night after night, continuing to consistently tell stories that engage our audiences, and also accepting that our stories have to adapt to changing cultural winds to remain relevant, really. So I suppose my plea, my provocation, whatever you want to call it, is really that, you know, to everyone on the call, people that are working in progressive sectors, wanting to push forward progressive narratives, is really simple. It's just to keep telling stories, to keep adding logs to the fire, because I think now more than ever, we need that fire to burn bright again. So thank you. I'll end there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. Really interesting insight into how we can lose people's interest and hence engagement. So thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Katie. So over to Katie, who is an inclusion and cohesion specialist from BCoco. Over to you, Katie.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Katie Donovan-Adekanmbi, and I'm an inclusion and cohesion specialist. I am the director of an organisation called BCoco, and we're out here working with organisations across sectors and across industries to build cohesive cultures and communities. The main kind of crux of what I do really is to challenge bias and systemic bias. And in order to do that, it's really, really important to have a really solid grounding and foundation in our understanding of equity. So I've got a few slides to take us through how we as an organisation work with organisations and people building the change within those organisations, a bit of a how-to. But before I do, Tom has just really inspired me to tell a little story, actually, because on Tuesday, the 24th of February, I flew to Dubai for my mother-in-law's 80th birthday, and with my sister-in-laws, and we brought her out here because in her youth, she's a nurse and a midwife. In her youth, she worked in Saudi Arabia, and this kind of part of the world was her stomping ground. So we brought her here to celebrate, and we had we've had a wonderful time. And on Saturday, I took myself down to the Museum of the Future. None of them wanted to come with me, so I went by myself. And it is a really, really incredible space. If anybody's been or would ever, want to look it up and kind of get an idea of what happens there. But it's a story of a 100-year projection of this country, essentially, what they plan to do and where they plan to be by 2071. And just totally galvanized, totally inspired, literally come back to the hotel with a pep in my step. And at that point, news started trickling in. In the US and Iran conflict. And we were told to be safe, stay close to our hotels, do not venture too far. And so in one day, I had quite two different experiences of complete elation and right through to fear and anxiety, to say the best. And around, so you know as well, we've got a baby with us, a 6-month-old baby with us. And by about 10 o'clock, an alert had gone off on all the guests, or everybody's phone really, in Dubai. And so you could hear this alert go off simultaneously around the hotel. And it basically said, stay away from windows, stay away from doors, and get to a safe low space, low point if you can. So people started to head for the lobby, rushing the hallways, the lifts, and it was again quite scary in the moment. And we landed in that lobby, and it was quiet. Most people, surprisingly, people were waiting for an update. People were quite quiet. There were whispers, and all we could hear was the baby babble coming from my little nephew at the top of his lungs. Okay, because he was oblivious. He was completely oblivious to what was happening, and he was just telling everybody about it. He would listen in proximity, and it was the cutest thing in the most surreal circumstances. And there's a film many of you may have watched called Collateral Beauty. So in times of kind of crisis and chaos, I'm always looking for the collateral beauty, and the sounds that came from that baby in that moment was the most calming and effective that we could have hoped for. So long story short, there we are, 2 flights cancelled in, and hopefully home on Saturday, fingers crossed. There are the worst places in the world to be stranded. It is a pretty fabulous place. But yeah, that is my circumstances, people. So I am right now presenting to you from my hotel room in Dubai. All right. So just to set the scene a little bit. So what do? I mainly work with organizations wanting to improve on their culture, but I also train a lot of allies, a lot of champions, and a lot of advocates in how to have difficult conversations, how to start to think about the infrastructure that they work in, and how to start to build the change when we think about systems. Okay, now to be able to do that, one thing that's really important, and actually Tom, you really made me think about this, is knowing what your values and principles are is really, really important. Okay, incredibly important in being able to stand up with conviction for what you believe in, because if you don't know where you stand, if you don't know what grinds your gears or fuels your passions, then it's hard to take a position on anything, really, anything coming through. So that's one component, values and principles. Another, okay, would be to understand equity, really, really understand equity, what it is and how we do it. Okay, so if I can jump 2 slides, please. What I want to do is just temperature check in the room. Okay, who knows what the 9 protected characteristics are in the UK? All right, I just want us to understand what we're working with when it comes to what's protected by law. So if you could get your fingers at the ready, get ready to type for me. What is in the Equalities Act that's protected from victimization, discrimination, and harassment? Give them to me, people. Gender. Thank you, out the gates. Gender, what I will take is sex, because the language is sex. Race, thank you. Age, religion and belief, disability. Oh, you're on fire, people. Education. Interesting. Education doesn't feature. Kind of wish it does, but people tell me, what would education, how would we judge? What category would that come under, education, if it was protected? Class. Thank you, Colin. Class, exactly that. Thank you, Pamela. Okay, so education would come under class, and you know, that's a big part of our conversation here today. What else when we think about class and when we think about kind of protections of economic status, how else might we judge a person's economic status? Okay, marriage and civil partnership. Thank you. Deprivation, income. It's an interesting one, people, because economic status is not protected. Okay, so I'm going to give them, if we can get the next slide. That was a wonderful attempt. Thank you, everyone. We got them all between us. Okay, these 9 are protected. All right, so economic status come through a lot and it's not protected. Okay, and we had education as a way of judging somebody's economic status, housing as another way of judging somebody's economic status. Any more ways in which, because what's quite ironic about the economic status not being protected is that there are loads of ways in which bias gets triggered. Accent is another one. Okay, thank you, Rachel, coming through with the accent. Clothing, career. Okay, what academic institution you attended, what postcode you live in. Okay, all these different methods of judging a person. Okay, weight. Thank you, Agnes. So weight isn't protected either. So size can, people with different sizes can experience a lot of bias. Okay, and also another one coming through at the moment that you know, that women feel quite strongly about is kind of the menopause and that being protected by the Act. You've also got kind of tattoos, and we can expand. Okay, we can keep going. When we think about what triggers people's biases to perpetrate maybe discrimination, then we've got these 9 which the law operate within. But if we think about our roles and we think about the organizations we work with, okay, how much more aware do we need to be about the fact that the 9 is actually quite limited? Okay, because people experience bias across this wide spectrum of identity markers that we've just talked about and that you've just popped into the chat. All right, so with that in mind, if I can get the next slide, please. I want us to think about this image. Okay, and this image does the rounds a lot. There's lots of different versions of this image, but I just want to talk you through it. All right, I'm really drawn the differences here between equality and equity, because when I'm working with organizations, what I often am met with is this conflation or a complete misunderstanding of what the two are. Okay, and if we're going to do equity, we need to understand the difference between them. All right, so inequality, here we can see this person with lots of boxes, oodles of, and for me those boxes represent resources, wealth, finance, opportunity, connection, community. Yeah, and we look and we, you know, we just have to look at what's going on in the world right now. We just, you know, we cast our mind back to 2020 and when COVID hit, and there was no group left unscathed. Okay, there was no group. We had older people left out of contingency plans. We had the Black Lives Matters protests erupt on the international stage. Women disproportionately affected by domestic violence. The postcode scandal when it comes to academic results. You know, inequality is rife, and I know that everybody, well, I assume that everybody in this room is kind of involved in that in some way, and building the change in some way, and is very kind of got a heightened sense of consciousness to that. I think so. What happens then is organizations often and historically, okay, have gone for equality. Let's give everybody the same. All right, give everybody a box. It's easier. Then we don't have to deal with the conflict that may arise or the challenges that might get put forward. Let's just give everybody the same. But I ask you, people, if I was to give everybody in this room £100, okay, to put it into perspective, for some people that might change their world in this moment. For others, okay, might not make much of a difference. For some, it would hardly go noticed. Okay, so when we think about being means tested, etc., this idea of equity is what kind of underpins that. All right, so equality is give everybody the same, and I'll tell you how else it sounds. Quite often we hear people say, I don't treat people differently. I treat everybody the same. Okay, I don't see difference. Yeah, that's how equality might sound. Now, it might sound good. It might feel even borderline humanitarian in the moment. Okay, but what we're kind of saying is, I can't be bothered to see difference. I don't want to apply the skill or the knowledge or the insight into difference in this moment. I don't have the capacity for it. So I treat everybody the same. Okay. When actually what we need to do is change and shift our mindset to this idea of equity. Okay. And in this image, when we see equity, we see that we've got somebody on a box and somebody on a ramp. Okay, and that individual in a wheelchair has had their needs assessed, right? They've had their needs considered, and they've had the right and reasonable adjustments put in place for them. Okay, now for disability, we've been doing this a long time. But the Equalities Act is an amalgamation of different legislation brought together in 2010, and we've been doing reasonable adjustments when it comes to disability for a long time. But what does that look like when it comes to race? What does that look like when it comes to economic status? What does that look like when it comes to gender inequality? What is the ramp equivalent if we want to do equity and do equity well, okay, across the board? Okay, now it's again, it's important that we start thinking like this, because there is a lot of oppression Olympics that seem to be taking place in this conversation of late. A lot of comparisons about who's got it worse than the next group, who's got it, you know, a lot of comparing and contrasting, and that can be really, really hard to manage and justify why certain people or certain individuals or certain groups, marginalized and otherwise, are getting equitable services. Okay, that takes into consideration the deprivation or disadvantage or the potential for victimization, harassment or discrimination. So I want you to keep that thought close in your mind. What is the equivalent, the ramp equivalent for the groups that you work with within your services? What is the ramp equivalent for the individuals that you serve within your organization? Okay. Now, I often get accused of being idealistic for this last one, the whole liberation piece. But again, that fence represents maybe, you know, toxic cultures, poorly written policies, unchecked personal internalized bias. Okay. And if we can get rid of those things entirely, we don't have to maneuver around the fence. Okay, we don't have to make reasonable adjustments to be able to kind of play the game. Yeah, if they're not there to begin with. The older an organization is I work with, the more deconstructing that we have to do just within the system, within the infrastructure, and within ourselves as well. The younger, however, it's different. The younger an organization is, the less infrastructure there is to kind of review and undo. Okay, so with this image in mind, I want us to now think about intersectionality. Lisa, can you give me a time check, please?
Yep, you're okay. You've got about another 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. Quickly on to intersectionality. I'm not going to labour on this, but I just want everyone in the room to understand how, when we think about the 9 protected characteristics that flooded into the chat just now, that intersectionality is where multiple identities can exist simultaneously. So usually at the top of a session, I introduce myself as, you know, dual heritage woman, I'm neurodivergent, I'm a working class girl, I'm a mother of twins, you know, all those identity markers that I bring to the table are my experience and my lived experience. And because of how intersectionality shows up, that means my experience is quite unique and compared to some, and can compound my experience compared to others. So next slide, please, Madeleine. And so this is an example of kind of how intersectionality works. Everyone here has an age. Everyone here will be ascribed a sex, okay, or identify with a sex, or gender identity. We all have a race, okay, and we all have a belief system. And how these identities kind of coincide and collide is what makes my experience in this world and how I receive your services quite unique. And so we talk about a cross-cultural kind of understanding, a cross-cultural literacy that needs to show up across the identity markers, and not just see people through the silos that are. And when we think about economic status, we all have an economic status too, and we know how poverty can make for an incredible vulnerability. Okay, incredible vulnerability to people, but you can be disadvantaged, and also from a different ethnic group. You can be disadvantaged and still have a disability. So I think understanding how intersectionality shows up for your end user, for your customer, for your patient, for your members is really, really, really important too. I just want to talk to the ACEs as well. If I can just get to the next slide, please. So we think about identity, we think about intersectionality and how identity shows up. And I'm sure that, again, I was told that most people on this call will be from public sector organisations or charity sector organisations. And I would hope that a lot of people would know what ACEs stand for, as in the adverse childhood experiences that people experience, right? So we've got, and here we've got a list of them. And so there are 10 that are measured. And so we can see them here, from kind of physical abuse to sexual abuse, to domestic violence within a home that somebody might experience before the age of 18. Okay. Now, the report actually stipulates that if you've experienced one, that you're more likely to have kind of heart disease, I think, but more 40% more likely with just one adverse childhood effect. So we need to also take into account how trauma influences a person's kind of lived experience and how they show up in the world, and how that affects their intersectionality. I would just like to say on this as well, with the adverse childhood experiences, which if you Google, lots of different resources, especially CAMS have a lot of resources around adverse childhood effects for people that would like to do a little bit more research on it. What it doesn't necessarily take into consideration is racism. It doesn't necessarily take into consideration misogyny either. So they're not in the robust categorization. So we need to think again, like we did with the 9 protected characteristics. You've got the kind of the essentials that are covered, but what also sits outside of that? If we expand our thinking around this particular subject matter, where will it take us? What's a wider view on that? So with that in mind, if I can get the next slide, please. Thank you, David, for popping that into the chat for us. Thank you. So what I want you to think about now, from your kind of organizational perspective or your sector's perspective, is how are you doing equity? Okay, with all these themes that I've just introduced in mind, in terms of identity, in terms of a person's experience, and what they're bringing into the kind of space in the rooms with you. What is it that you're doing to apply equity for people, and what is your organization doing? So I currently work quite a lot within health and medicine. I did a piece of work, I've been doing a piece of work over the last 5 years around removing or combating racism in medicine and science. And the equity question is always at the core of what we do. The identification of where equity isn't, and the identification of how equity can be done better is actually at the core of how we start to build the change, how we start to improve services and build quality improvement projects. So in maternity, for example, and I do a lot of work around kind of Black maternity, because Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth, according to the 2018 Embrace report. It's simple things that come through in how we can start to build the change. These women's pain threshold is disbelieved, for one. And that is one of the core reasons. And that is linked to a stereotype that women, Black women especially, brown women, are more resilient and they're stronger and they can take more pain. So they're left in their pain for longer. Okay. So what we get people to think is, how can we apply equity to this moment? Okay. And that is, we activate as soon as we have a Black or brown woman enter our services. We recognize that they're just more vulnerable by the very fact that they're Black and brown in the color of their skin. And if that might result in longer appointments or more sophisticated consultation, then these are the kind of methods of equity that we need to start to draw upon. Okay, so I ask you again, I mean, I'll give you a maternity example, but when you think about your own services, how do you do equity? All right, and I'll just leave you on this thought, and again, drawing on some of Tom's thinking from the first presentation. A lot of equity is being undone at the moment, and yes, I think maybe we were in a bit of a progressive bubble of, you know, excitement for change and what was on the horizon, and what we've got now is what feels like, for me and other practitioners in this space, is a tsunami coming back the other way now, and an undoing of equity. Okay, an undoing. And what that looks like, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I've got a colleague who runs a trauma-informed organisation and works quite heavily with prison services. And there's a layer of equity for young men, Black men especially, where before they're sentenced, some of their life circumstances are taken into consideration, and that currently is under threat. So that piece of equity before sentencing, because we know already that Black and brown men have higher sentences, and our prisons are disproportionately populated with young Black and brown men. So that was a little piece in kind of trying to level the playing field, if you like. I've also had another participant on a course describe recently that her nephew has neurodiversity, young primary school age, has a HCP plan. Is that the right acronym? And with that has the kind of times table and different kind of support put on his desk. Okay, so stuck on his desk to help him, times table, add in, taken away, etc. And this recently was taken away, okay, from him by a teaching assistant, based on the fact that it was an unfair advantage, okay, and that everybody should be treated the same. So everybody being treated the same again takes us to equity. Okay, sorry, takes us to equality. We're back in equality because we're treating everybody the same, because we don't want to give unfair advantage. Okay, but equity is really considering people where they are in their current circumstances and drawing on our cross-cultural awareness, literacy, insight to make sure that individuals get what they need at that individual level, which is cognitively taxing. It does require we engage in a more kind of thoughtful and deep way. And I think historically, people just want an easy life and convenience, and that's where we treat everybody the same approach comes from. So I feel like I've done enough talking. I might have even gone over my time, but I look forward to the panel, any questions that you may have. And actually, if you can, Madeleine, if you can just put the final slide on, I'm not the final slide, number 11. I'm on LinkedIn, people. No need, just I'm on LinkedIn, people. And if you want to connect, please do. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you so much for still joining us today, despite the circumstances you find yourself in. So thank you. And a couple of people mentioned in the chat how I think we're all probably quite familiar with the equality equity image, but including the liberation image as well, really super powerful. So thank you, really appreciate that. Okay, we are now going to move on to Madeleine. Madeleine is the comms lead at Clean Slate Training and Employment. So Madeleine, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today and to kind of bounce off of what Tom and Katie said about how we can keep the fire going and how we can stop equity from being undone. And I think that really starts with listening to people and their lived experiences of hardship. So I'm here to spotlight what people told us during community research that we did on stigma and accessing support, and how their experiences help explain why people can feel shut out. So first, a little bit of background into the project, which really inspired why we're here today. Last summer, London's mental health partnership, Thrive London, commissioned us to develop a campaign. And the aim of this campaign was to tackle poverty stigma, especially when it comes to accessing support for money and for mental well-being. It was really important for us that this campaign be shaped by the very people we set to target. So we ran 4 focus groups across London in community spaces and food banks, and we had a total of 51 participants help shape the campaign messaging, the visuals, and we landed on the Take What's Yours campaign. And you can see some of the designs from that campaign. And the message was simple: support is yours for the taking. We were really happy to have reached over 380,000 people through targeted social media ads that were also translated into 5 languages. And engagement was really promising. We had over 10,000 people click through to borough directories listing local support services. And the campaign was meant to end there. But we had so much of this data from focus groups, and we really didn't want those voices to fade out once the campaign ended. And what became really clear during those discussions was that stigma was only part of the story. People began raising challenges that we hadn't fully anticipated, and about what it actually felt like trying to access support. And so that sets the stage for what inspired this webinar. And today, alongside the focus group insights, you'll also hear clips from Miss Begum and her mother, who took part in one of the focus groups, and who I emailed the participants asking them if they would like to be interviewed in more detail about their experience navigating support. And I broke down the findings into 4 sections. We have pre-engagement barriers, engagement barriers, the consequences, and what people say need to change. So starting off with some pre-engagement barriers, the things that make it difficult for people to even begin asking for help. So I asked the group some agree or disagree questions to get the ball rolling. I asked them, is it difficult to talk about money? And mostly everyone across all of the groups agreed. Each group brought up things like feeling embarrassed, feeling shame. When it came to conversations around benefits, for example, one mom talked about feeling judged for being on benefits by other mothers at the school. Another talked about job seekers being seen as losers and not wanting to go to the job center for this reason. There also seemed to be a understanding that there was the right kind of benefit claimant. For example, it felt like people had to justify that they had worked all of their lives, and fell on hard times. And these people may be categorized as the deserving type, and other people were maybe seen as conning the system. But what we realized throughout these conversations was that stigma was not the only pre-engagement barrier, but also not the most significant. So many people don't look for support simply because they don't know what help is available or where to go for support. So for example, when Mrs. Begum's husband died, her daughter had to take over and had no clue what her mother needed. So this is what she had to say.
My mom, she turned pension age last year, February, her 66th birthday. And it was like, no one told us that we would have to, because mum gets state pension, we didn't know. We thought that everything was going to be the same. Nothing would really change. It's just the amount that she gets would change from universal credit to pension. And we didn't know what state pension meant. We didn't know what pension credit meant. We find out that she's not entitled to the full housing benefit. She's not entitled to the full council tax. She has to pay herself to make up for the shortfall. We had no idea how to calculate anything. Mum's not well. She's deaf, hard of hearing. We lost my dad. And my dad was the one that used to take care of all of this stuff. So imagine like knowing that, you know, she's going to have to like pay, and we didn't know how that would work out. And they didn't tell us a thing. They just kind of like expected you to know.
So this was a common topic that was brought up at the focus groups, and also what the campaign was trying to address. We were trying to address stigma, but also trying to show people that support is available to them and they can take what's theirs. But throughout the conversations, we were missing a key part, which is access to the support services. So what one of the participants said, I feel like really gets to the heart of the issue. Money is out there that people are eligible for, but no one tells you about it, and it's difficult to access. So that leads us into some of the engagement barriers that people talked about. What happens when people actually try to get help? So this is where the focus group discussions, I think, became most lively. When we talk about accessibility barriers, language was a huge issue. People speaking English as their second language, not being misunderstood by staff because of their language, or not understanding certain materials because they weren't translated, and relying on family members to translate for them. And this is the case with Miss Begum and her mother, that she's translating for her mother and translating those experiences. Another huge barrier was digital exclusion. We gave people digital vouchers to thank them for joining the focus group and participating. But then we realized that some people don't have emails that we could send them to. People don't have certain computer skills required to navigate the system. I mean, I'm someone who has a lot of digital skills, and sometimes navigating the UC system online is so confusing. So really imagine if you don't even have an email, how much more difficult that would be. And one of the participants, for example, he came to me after and he said, I want to apply to a job. I have my CV, but I don't know how to attach it to my email. And I think with these kind of hitting a wall barriers, you see that people want to get help, but they're met with these things that stop them from getting that support. And other things can make it more difficult. Sight, hearing impairments, those further intensify digital exclusion. Dyslexia, people said that it was hard for them to understand complicated information. And then having mental health issues, it just makes navigating the system so much more overwhelming. And those accessibility barriers can be often made worse by how systems are designed. So there was common frustrations about experiences with untrained staff, unclear instructions, misleading guidance, rushed interactions. People felt like they were being rushed out of the door. And a lot of people mention just the lack of services in general, especially compared to what they experienced in the past. So Miss Begum, for example, recalls a time where there were more activities when she was growing up in the 90s, and her mom reminded her that youth clubs exist, which we now know are decreasing exponentially. So we can hear more about their experience with that.
It was very hard getting in contact with the council. The rent support team wasn't very supportive. And then I finally had to make some sort of complaint. And then they kind of like said, okay, we could, give your mum a rent card, and a council tax book where she could make her monthly payments. And I said, you guys are going to have to do something, because she's not used to this, and she can't just pay you a lump sum she doesn't have. So you're going to have to give her something that she could pay in installment. They kind of like, yeah, that's the only thing they did, but only because we had to kind of like put our foot down, not because they did it from the get-go. And then when I tried to look for support and help, we couldn't get appointments. I tried to call Age UK. I remember at one point they said, yeah, we can come on this date, which would be like a month and a half along the line, and it would be somewhere totally different from where we live. Mum's got mobility; she lives on a wheelchair. So just getting her from A to B would be an issue. So they said, call Citizens Advice Bureau. Citizens Advice Bureau are so hard to get through. I mean, I've emailed them. I didn't get a response. And you call them from 9 a.m. early in the morning, and you could be on the phone for 2 hours.
So I think it's really what she's saying is getting to that even when support exists, the journey to reach it is complicated, and it can be very discouraging. I'd like to note that Ms. Begum also said that she knows that these organizations that she mentioned serve their importance. It's just that, when services are overstretched, these are the consequences. And when people repeatedly encounter these kind of barriers, the consequences, they build up. So classic financial consequences, people missing out on benefits. We had someone from the group say after 15 years, they realized that whole time they were eligible for disability benefits but had no idea. People were losing out on transitional support. And in the case of Mrs. Begum, she ended up being in rent arrears for 6 months because things weren't communicated well enough to her. And we also can't underscore the effect that these barriers have on people's emotional state. And Miss Begum talks about that and what her and her mother experience.
Oh, mom did express like the worries and the anxieties, not sleeping, not knowing what's going to happen next. And also it just made us feel like, well, I'm speaking personally from my own point of view, but a little bit useless and helpless. Yeah, it did. I just felt like, oh gosh, like what am I meant to do? Like, what am I meant to do? Where do I start? And I kept waking up every morning, like so much anxiety, so much like not knowing where to go, where to start. It was just such a horrible phase.
So these experiences, these barriers, these consequences over time, they start shaping how people view the system itself. So in the group, there were a lot of common beliefs, such as services were intentionally withholding information, that systems were actively working against them, that support can make things worse. There was also some mistrust in the councils. If they would get council letters, that they would fear that they would be negative and they may not want to open it. So these beliefs come from repeated negative experiences of trying to navigate the system. And after one of the focus groups, I found this sticky note that I'd like to read. It says, "The worst kind of injustice is the one delivered by the very system tasked and entrusted with preventing it." I think many of us in this room, why we came here today is because we want to help people. We want to be engaged in this conversation. But I think what this person wrote is a reminder that good intentions aren't enough. And I think the question becomes, what do we need to do to change to make sure that we are just, that we are building trust, and that we are upholding our end of the bargain? So what is needed to improve service delivery and design? The participants gave a lot of practical suggestions, clearer guidance, where to go, what happens next, warm referrals where people are connected to the right person who is expecting them, ready to give them assurance, accessibility improvements like translated information, face-to-face options, clear phone numbers, not relying just on QR codes, and also just not feeling rushed out of the door, having empathy and warmth. And Miss Begum describes the empathy and warmth that she received, that her and her mother received at community spaces. So I'm going to play that clip here.
She said that they were very good to her. She's going to the Cardinal Hume Center, like she's saying that they saved her, like that her mental state, it was very messy, and they helped. And what I'm saying about the Abbey Center, it's the same. It's just very like they're not judgmental at all. And I've met so many people there now that I've become friends with, that we just go there. We go there for a cup of tea or like a coffee, go and have our lunch there now. And there's other services that we've accessed in the Abbey Center because of me going to do that one thing for Universal Credit. So they have like a food pantry there on a Friday. Yeah, so I go there on a Friday when I can, whenever I can. And they have other, like they have like sewing classes, and they have like gardening club, and like obviously like my mum loves all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like we've opened up a can of worms.
And to end off my conversation with Miss and Mrs. Begum, I asked what they would want decision makers to understand about what people are going through and what could actually make a difference. And this is what she said.
I don't feel like the big dogs don't. Maybe they understand it, but they can't feel what we're feeling because they're not going through it. They're just like the mouthpiece for whatever party they're in. To feel it is to live it, or to know someone that's lived it, or just to feel it a little bit is to like feel it, like live it a little bit, if not a lot. Because they don't feel it, they're not gonna have support systems out there that they would feel like, oh gosh, this would work. I think they should listen to the people and what the people want, number one. And number two, they should fund the community more and let the community leaders take lead with the community, rather than just, hiring like people to take care of things in that community. It should be led by the residents and the community, because that's where we know what we need and we know how to run. Like if we had a chance, we would take care of our own community and our own people. I feel like that needs to come back, because we had that a very long time ago, and that stopped somewhere along the line. I don't know when it stopped, but it did stop. We need that back again. We need a community-led council.
So we started this work with the campaign last summer, and the focus was really on stigma, but listening to people's experiences brought the conversation to access. And I hope it's a reminder, a reflection that if we engage with communities, listening is where it has to begin. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it back to Lisa now.
Thank you, Madeleine. Thank you, Madeleine. Really, really interesting. A really clear message around how communities describe feeling shut out and left behind. Thank you. Right now, over to Jeff. Jeff is the founder and managing director of Clean Slate. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to all the speakers as well. It's been so inspiring. Yeah, so now I might have taken the storytelling idea a bit too much to heart, but I'm also going to whiz through this because we're a little bit behind time, and I'm keen that we have time for questions. But also there's a section in this where we get to hear from someone who's has that lived experience, and I want to make sure there's time to hear what Emma has to say. Madeleine described the campaign that we did last year. I attended some of the community conversations and was really struck by, we'd been commissioned to tackle stigma, but actually, yeah, as Madeleine described, really people were concerned really about getting more concerned about getting the information, as much as issues around stigma. And in terms of actually challenging stigma, it's not on people who experience it to make that change. We can help them cut through stigma. We can show them where the help is. But actually, if we're going to talk about stigma and actually engaging people, engaging communities who feel left in the dark and left behind, then it's this audience, people who've come today, and other service providers and policymakers across the UK, because we need to understand where this disconnect has taken place between our best efforts to help people and communities who feel set adrift a little bit. I kind of reflected on how this really became a bit of a passion project for me, but then realized that it always probably has been this idea of social justice, and a kind of identifying with otherness and feeling left out. And there's a few blogs that I've done over the years that have kind of tapped into this, and I've kind of reflected on, funny that Katie mentioned about sort of childhood experiences. I've not carried this around as a trauma, but I did think about it when I was writing about a blog one time about how there was a school trip when I was at primary school, and I didn't get on with the teacher at all. And anyway, we did this sort of human crocodile thing 10 minutes down the road and ended up on a council estate where I lived. And then the lesson was about how this is where poor people live. I'm sure she didn't say it quite like that, but that's essentially the message. And that the housing there was shoddy, and there was no privacy. And I'm sure there was a lot of she was right in a lot of what she was saying, but obviously the experience made me feel like they're talking about me. I feel like I've got something to say here, but I'm feeling a little bit humiliated and intimidated, and I'm definitely not supposed to be part of this conversation. Fast forward to later in my school career, I suppose, and I was the first in my family to go into further education, doing A-levels in sixth form, and it was a shock to me. I remember really clearly the day that I found that all my friends and a lot of the people in the room in sixth form were on track for university. It never occurred to them that wouldn't be what they did. And I was sat there going, well, that's not why I'm here. Maybe I'm not supposed to be in this conversation either. Maybe this isn't where I'm supposed to be. And that kind of sense of isolation and alienation from something. I did then go on into later, 2 years later. So I worked in the bank for a couple of years, realized I hated that. And then I think what served me really well is just a disposition towards defiance. And if somebody tells me I can't do something, I tend to go, well, I bet I could. So I did go to university, and while I was there, I decided I wanted to be a journalist, and I set up a university magazine, and campaigned on homelessness. And then as it happened, the Big Issue started up in Bath, where I was, and I became part of the launch team, and later director for the Southwest, and ultimately managing director for the Big Issue in London. When I left the Big Issue to set up Clean Slate and to provide training and employment opportunities for people who face barriers to employment, I realized that actually there was a bigger picture here, and that the employment opportunities was about actually helping people to become better off. In many ways, they were kind of trapped. There's a poverty trap, but very practical issues. You know, the high cost Bright House, the rent to own furniture store, was closer than Argos, for example. People went online to shop around on Amazon as much. You know, cash machines on those estates were charging people. Doorstep lending was the norm, and people didn't know about sort of affordable credit, things like that. And so we sort of broadened, or I broadened the brief from just employment and training to actually information sharing. And obviously I drew on that experience of the Big Issue as a publisher to create Quids In magazine, but also as an enterprise, starting with the consumer and thinking about actually what else does the consumer read, and actually working with publishers from Future Publishing in Bath, where I was based as well, decided that this magazine needed the information that what would now be provided by Money and Pensions Service, obviously the Citizens Advice website, local authority websites, but in the format of a supplement to a tabloid newspaper, for example, or to Take a Break magazine. And so that's how where Quids In was kind of born. I knew that landlords had a duty of care to their tenants at the time, so this is 2008. And were producing quarterly newsletters, and Quids In acted as a supplement, and within less than 2 years we were reaching 250,000 households across the UK. I'm going to sort of skip some of what I wanted to say, but that duty of care was taken off at the same time as sort of landlords especially were moving more to digital, and so that kind of communication tool was then sort of less viable. We still sell Quids In magazine as a print publication, but we also have an email service. So a bit like Money Saving Experts email service, but dedicated to people on low incomes, no credit card ads or ISAs, and not for profit, of course. In terms of how this is part of a conversation, it feels like we're more and more of us on this call, but also when I go to other meetings, there's a recognition now that people feel left in the dark and left behind, and that's where communities are starting to drift. So to another bonfire, right? So and what they you know, for local authorities to say, well, we sent everyone an email about updating them about what's going on, what schemes are available and what help's available. But if people don't read it, or they're engaged with Facebook more, or they, you know, oh, it's an email from the council, that's not of interest to me. What they feel, how they feel part of the story is about what they see and hear and experience and feel in their local communities. And if something hasn't got fixed for ages and they don't know that, you know, there's a process to go through or whatever, it's just something that's been left, and they don't feel like anyone cares about their situation. So one of the things that we do at Clean Slate is we recruit people with lived experience. I feel a bit like lived experience, that there's a sense that it's starting to get described as a one of those wet logs that gets put on a fire. But for us, it is core, because Clean Slate has always incorporated people who have experience of hardship and have come through our service to help us deliver the service to other people. The image here is about the idea of sort of putting on your oxygen mask and then being able to help others, and it's a similar sort of process. So by recruiting people with lived experience, training them and including them in our team, it means that we're able to recruit them over time, and more than 60% of our staff team, our money coaches now, have come through that process. One of the people that has just recently completed that training is Emma, and she's given us...
Now, I attended a treatment centre, which I'm quite open about, for addiction. And coming out of there, after having 6 months of being institutionalised, I'd say, which was great. My life today is very good. I've turned things around. It was a real struggle because the rehab sort of cut you off then. They did provide a small aftercare service, but not. So I had to look at housing, I had to look at finances, I had to look at how to look at employment, I had to look at where to get food from, a food bank from, the whole shaboodle. And for somebody that had never, ever in her life at the age of 52, as I was then, it was a massive shock. I just didn't know where to turn. I was pointed to the Citizens Advice, which was a very, very complex and hard thing, in that you had to get an appointment, which was 2 months later down the road from when you first made contact, because they're so busy. I was a little bit fortunate that I did get advice off people that had gone before me. But yeah, there was a lot of stigma. I felt very, very much in the dark because there wasn't really any guidance or anybody out there. The local council, unless you were sleeping on the street, they didn't know what to give you advice. And then obviously it was in time that once I did manage to get myself a grant through a local charity in Cheltenham, from that I bought a laptop, and from that I started doing my own research. And because again, you've got this barrier of, you know, so many bits of paperwork to fill out, so many, you know, reasons that they're not just helping you, and so many times you're having to explain why, and they do look at you as though and I don't think they really realize, I mean, yes, they're doing a job, they must meet lots and lots of people in the same position every day. So I do look at them sometimes and think, I don't know how you do your job, but on reflection, they have got a job to do and they've got to sort of not show emotion to it. But it is very, very frustrating, very frustrating. And I don't think they realize, or do they realize, but not show it, that they're the rules and regulations they're having to follow to, and the processes and the policies and procedures aren't good enough. Unless you're really, really in it, I think I absolutely do, because I was naive to this in the world I used to live in until it happened to me. I had no idea how people struggled or what they went through. You know, I was from a nice middle-class, privileged white girl background, but once I'd had my whole life stripped, sorry, not ripped, of me, because I fell into addiction through whatever circumstances, I was just another person out there asking for help and not knowing or having any direction of where to go. It is only from me being out there and meeting people like me that I have learnt, oh, didn't know that existed. Oh, I didn't know about that. It was only as I started doing the peer mentoring course and understood the concept of how you bring people to work for you that have been through this process. I thought, what a great idea, because, you know, it's people like me that have had that understanding of what it's like to have nothing and to have to go out and find it. The word you said is resourceful. I became very resourceful, even to the point where I have people ring me up now who've left the rehab because somebody's told them, oh, Emma can help you. Yeah, the general feel I got from people that came to sit down with the Clean Slate peer mentors was one of relief when they found that somebody would be able to make a phone call for them. As simple as that. If some people didn't have access to laptops or computers or know how to use their phones, you could see their relief that they had a human being talking to them and, you know, guiding them. Some people are really, really desperate. It's awful. It is. And I've seen a lot of people go back to addiction or lose their lives. I'm being honest now, you know, because they feel that there is not enough out there to help them. I think compassion is needed. People to talk to are needed. People who've been in that situation and understand what they're going through. I think just, yeah, you know, just an ear to listen. But in this world we live in, nobody's got any time. You can't even get a GP appointment to talk to your GP if you're feeling down and low. It's just such too big an area to know exactly where to pinpoint change. But I think just to start in conversations is something.
So I chatted for ages to Emma, and it was just such a so refreshing to hear sort of that feedback and interest in what we were doing with changing the conversation. So just to sort of finish off, really, in terms of how I would hope that we can all work together, really, to start changing the conversation, engaging those people who've drifted off to other people's bonfires, is really to start thinking about where, you know, how can we reconnect? As Katie said, really treating hardship and socioeconomic disadvantage as a protected characteristic, thinking about where those barriers come. You know, does someone need to pay to travel to get to a meeting to talk about getting more money for benefits, for example, would be a way of sort of seeing that that's clearly not taking into account the needs of someone. Is a different way to do it. You know, I think silence is not leadership. I think we need to be proactive. We need to be explaining how systems work, because somebody somewhere else will be whispering in people's ears that there's a lot of queue jumping going on, for example, and we need to be more outspoken. We need to be talking to people about how things work and why things are done a certain way. Make sure that intolerance is not creeping into our services through service users or through our own sort of blindness to the barriers that are put up, sometimes by language. Cultural sensitivity. The image in this slide is about Google Translate, and it's actually taking what is very professional bureaucratic language, which often ends up in emails to job seekers, for example, and translating it into something that's very easy to understand. It's not dumbed down, it's just taken all the complexities that are completely unnecessary out of an email or a communication and actually turned into something that people can read and can identify with and relate to. We need to listen. So the community events that we did was a good example, but also through feedback and making sure that we take note of how people respond to us in services. We need to be the bridge. We need to partner with communities themselves, organisations rooted in those communities, as well as specialists who can provide specialist support and make sure that people are being better connected between those. One time I was talking to someone from a social a housing association, and we were trying to place long-term unemployed people into their organisation on a kind of temp basis. And the message I got back was, I'll be honest with you, the staff team don't really want people like that working here. I was like, well, they're your tenants. We all need to ask, would we be comfortable with our service users working here? And if not, actually challenge that culture, because that us and them is what has divided our societies. Open offer, really, quitting webinars like this. Obviously you're here, there will be more of these. We also have training and support services that we can work with partners to deliver and make sure that we're bridging these gaps, and just generally changing the conversation and thinking about some of the key themes from this morning's webinar and trying to build that into services. I'm sorry we've run over, but that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, and we will share the full presentation in the follow-up communication. Okay, so we've got 5 to 8 minutes left, I think. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And now it's over to you guys. Please either put your hand up and take yourself off mute to ask a question. I will come to you one by one, or post it in the chat. There's been loads of comments in the chat. Thank you so much for all your input. Really, really useful. And really interesting as well. So yeah, any questions for anyone on the panel? I can't see any hands, or please type anything in the chat as well if you would rather, and I can read it out. Or any comments from Barbara? I think we need to get away from call centre mentality. The idea that can solve a problem, provide support by not actually spending time with someone and giving them the time to understand. Plus the system is complex, absolutely. I think that's come out loud and clear this morning. And it needs fully trained, experienced people to help.
Yeah, one of the key things that came back through the community conversations was people feel processed and not treated as human beings with needs. And sort of very personal needs. And you know, if you're given allocated a time slot, and you know, it's like, well, this is what we can do now, move on, and there's no time for explaining how things work, and so people just feel like, you know, put through a machine, and it's dehumanizing.
Actually, Jeff, can I just add to that as well? Because through the ACEs framework, another one that I didn't mention earlier that doesn't sit within the kind of the 10 that gets measured in the original report was systemic harm. that I think Madeleine, that post-it really, like, that really resonated with me when I seen that, the systemic harm that can be traumatizing for individuals.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
absolutely. And I think that you can hear it in Miss Begum's voice when she's talking about her frustrations. And I think someone even mentioned it in the chat. When she's talking about the community organizations, you can hear the lightness in her voice. And she is someone who is caring for her mother, struggles with her own ill health, struggles with osteoporosis. She talked about having panic attacks going through the system. She's up against so many barriers, and the impact that going for a coffee, maybe not even getting the immediate support you need at the community spaces, but having the opportunity to connect with other people, you can hear it in her voice, the kind of impact that that had, even though she's facing all of those structural challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is anybody else? Anybody? I can't actually see everyone on the screen, so I can't see if any hands are up. But please, maybe put something in the chat if you would like to ask a question in person. Thank you. Early intervention and prevention is key to help alleviate the barriers. Yeah, that's really important. Gemma, McKay, yeah, my email is in the chat, so please reach out to us. We work in the Southwest. Anyone else like to ask a question or make a comment? And yes, 6 weeks of counselling isn't enough. Embedding this conversation
I'll come in from
children. Hi, David. Hi.
David from 3SG. I think Tom's point's really well made around the wet logs, and I think a lot of people in public services can actually think they're doing good when they're doing harm, and that sort of ties in with the asset-based community development. And it'd be great, Tom, if you could spend some time with government, local authorities to really understand that when they feel they are doing good, they might actually be causing more harm. And it's going to be really interesting with the pride in place, particularly in the Bath and North East Somerset area, where that particular area has done some great work and great community development work, and we could be in danger of actually diminishing all that great work and going back to the old process and actually damaging people's health. So yeah, I think we need to get to the stage where people recognise in their roles within public services that sometimes what they're doing is putting that fire out and not letting the fire flourish. How we do that on a scale, I don't know, but I think that really resonated with me. So thanks, Tom.
Great, thank you, David. Okay, right, I think that's we thank you. Madeleine just posted the feedback form link in the chat. Please do fill that out if you can. It's really useful for us to understand what you got out of today and what you'd like to see more of in the future. And we really hope that this is actually the start of the conversation. So please do reach out to us if you'd like to find out more about our work, look at ways in which we can collaborate and work together. And please also sign up to Quids in Pro, so you receive our monthly e-newsletters, which also will give you information about future events such as this, future webinars and training. So unless anyone else has something they would like to add, anyone from the panel, if you'd like to say anything else, otherwise I'll draw this to a close at exactly 11:30. Great. Thank you so much for coming in, everyone, and thanks for all the applause, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.